Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. This is huge. Also, subscribe to H.A. Goodman's other channel. That is in the description and also within the pinned comment. This is huge, ladies and gentlemen. John Brennan was referred to for criminal prosecution or investigation by John Ratcliffe, the current Central Intelligence Agency director, referred the former or the old CIA director for criminal investigation. He also is on record, Director Ratcliffe, the current CIA chief, that there's no statute of limitations for Brennan, Comey, Clinton, and others. Hit subscribe. This, ladies and gentlemen, is huge. That's according to ABC News, CNN, a whole bunch of publications. Check this out. This is the basis for the indictments that are essentially already written. They're almost certainly already written. To my super chat, thank you. To the new members, Dennis, thank you. Let's get started. This, ladies and gentlemen, is groundbreaking, even more so. It will be even more so than the Comey indictment.
Did John Brennan lie to Congress? Let me just read a couple things, actually, before you answer that. 2 years ago, we had Mr. Brennan in for an interview, and I asked him, how'd you learn about the dossier in December of 2016? Mr. Brennan replied, I received a copy of it from the FBI, and the CIA was very much opposed to having any reference or inclusion of the Steele dossier in the intelligence community assessment. That's what John Brennan told the United States Congress. 7 weeks ago, the Director of National Intelligence told us this: John Brennan lied and denied using the dossier in the intelligence community assessment because he knew it was discredited. CIA officer told the House Intelligence Committee Brennan refused to remove it, and when confronted with the dossier's main flaws, he responded, yes, but doesn't it ring true? John Brennan lied to us?
Mr. Chairman, I won't stylize the evidence. What I will say is that the intelligence community assessment, those that created it and any individual involved with it, is an ongoing investigation.
There's an investigation into what took place in December and January of December 2016, January 2017, when this whole thing started, this grand conspiracy. That is being investigated, is that right?
That has been publicly announced by the department.
That's been announced by the department. Did Chris Wray hide documents from this committee?
You would know better than me, sir.
Well, I think you told us like 700 pieces of information you've given this committee since you've been the director relative to just one incident, the Catholic memorandum from the Richmond field office.
I can give you the comparison, sir. Yeah, the Catholic memo, I believe we turned over 750 documents. In Mr. Ray's tenure, I believe they turned over 19 pages.
19 pages. You've given us 700. Why would Chris Wray hide information from this committee? You want to hazard a guess?
I'm sorry?
Hazard a guess why he would do that?
I don't know, sir.
Okay, so Kash Patel is the current FBI chief. Okay, hit subscribe. Check this out. He's the current FBI chief. Where was he 8 years ago during this testimony from John Brennan? This is also very, very important.
Do you know who commissioned the Steele dossier?
Where is Kash Patel? Sitting right behind Trey Gowdy. Okay, the current FBI chief. Now you might find this, if somebody just stumbles upon this channel and says, okay, Brennan's indicted. What does this have to do with the indictment of John Brennan, the upcoming, imminent, almost certain indictment that's taken place essentially already of John Brennan? Well, he's the FBI chief. And before that, he was listening to real-time perjury. Everybody from John Ratcliffe at the CIA to Kash Patel at the FBI to Tulsi Gabbard at the ODNI, all of them know that Brennan, Comey, and others committed perjury, in addition to statutes pertaining to conspiracy to frame and set up Trump. They know this. They've known this for the past 10 years. They now have the full control of the United States government. For the record, I'm not about political power. I'm not about tribalism. If the tables were turned I would have a completely different viewpoint. When I was the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, I said, no, I'm not going to vote for Clinton. They thought I was a heretic. If the tables were turned and it was Trump and Giuliani that purchased a dossier to set up and frame Hillary Clinton, I would say that is wrong. Hillary was not in the hotel room with Bill or with Harris or with Biden or with whatever, or President Obama. That's absurd and ridiculous. The way the other political party works is defend, deceive, defend, deceive. You catch me if you can, accuse, and, Trump was in a hotel room. We know that from the dossier. Well, that's false, and it was used to set up Trump. So I champion Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard and John Ratcliffe, not because they symbolize power for President Trump, but because they stand, in this case, in this instance, for truth. The truth is that they are finding out how Brennan, Comey, and others, Clinton, used government power to set up and frame Trump and to create a new Cold War. All of that was illegal, and perjury was a huge part of it, which is why the indictment almost certainly is written for Brennan. Check this out.
I don't.
Do you know if the FBI paid for any portion of...
So with all due respect to former Director Brennan, it is almost certain that every single answer is a lie or a misleading statement from here on out. Check this out. Almost every single answer we know from the ODNI report is perjury or something close to perjury. And then related to the other statutes as well, conspiracy statutes. Every single thing you hear from here on out is either an overt lie or misleading statement.
I don't.
Do you know if the FBI paid for any portion of the
I don't.
dossier?
I don't.
Do you know if the FBI paid for any portion of the Steele dossier?
I don't know. I know that there are press reports related to that, but I don't know. I have no firsthand knowledge of that.
Do you know whether any of the underlying allegations made in the Steele dossier were ever tested, probed, examined, cross-examined, whether the sources were examined for reliability, credibility?
I know that there were efforts made by the Bureau to try to understand whether or not any of the information in that was. I don't have any firsthand knowledge of it.
Do you know if the Bureau ever relied on the Steele dossier as part of any court filings, applications, petitions, pleadings?
I have no awareness.
Did the CIA rely on it?
No.
Why not?
Because we didn't. It wasn't part of the court.
Because we didn't is not a good answer. That is an answer given before a misleading or false statement. Check this out.
Because we didn't. It wasn't part of the corpus of intelligence information that we had. It was not in any way used as a basis for the intelligence community assessment that was done. It was not.
So that's perjury. That is perjury. Okay? That is an overt lie. We know that from the newly declassified Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence, declassified documents. That is overt, patent, almost certainly a patently false statement. Almost certainly.
All right, this is my last line of question. I hope I have waited sufficiently long enough to ask you about leaks to not inflame the anger of our friends in the media who think Republicans are hyper-focused on it, so we'll just do it last. Some of your colleagues have testified that our surveillance programs are critical, vital, indispensable to our national security. Do you agree with this? Then those like yourself and Director Pompeo and Admiral Rogers and Director Comey and the people that we trust
Protect classified information and violated that oath and shared that information in an unauthorized fashion with members of the media.
Well, my friend from Washington, and he is my friend,
That oath.
I assume a justification. You can't just wake up in the morning and say, hey, I feel like knowing who participated in X, Y, and Z. There has to be a justification, right?
So right now they're talking about leaks. And so what happened with Brennan, especially Comey and others, they fed information to the New York Times, Washington Post, almost certainly all of them, and other smaller left-leaning publications, which shall remain nameless, and certain people who shall remain nameless. And they fed information on, for example, a Steele dossier, for example, investigations into Trump and Russia's interference and potential collusion. And that was written in thousands upon thousands upon thousands of articles the past 10 years. But in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, what were the leaks are to generate and to create a media narrative. That's why, and journalists are very, they think they've, won the lottery if they have a source at the FBI or the CIA telling them, feeding them information, because it's a super secret source that nobody else has. What they don't realize, or what they don't care about maybe, is that the government official, whether it's Comey or McCabe or people under them or Brennan or others, when they're leaking information to let's say the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, or, publications that are overtly left-leaning, and those are overtly left-leaning, but like publications that are super left-leaning, when they're feeding the stories are then circulated in media. They create a national narrative. They create a story. And then judges look at the story created in the public record and say, well, I'll sign off on this FISA warrant. Yeah, maybe we should. I mean, it's being reported in the news that there's reason to believe that Trump was working with the Kremlin. And so that's how they set up and frame Trump, through these leaks, in part through these leaks.
Yes.
All right. So how do we get from that to names being on the front pages of certain major U.S. newspapers?
It's an excellent question.
What would be an equally excellent answer?
Sherry Matthews, thank you so much for gifting those memberships. Sherry, thank you so much. To the members on this channel, thank you. So kind of you. And to my super chat, thank you. Let's listen to this again. Sherry, so kind of you. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for the kind words in the comments section.
Is of certain major U.S. newspapers.
It's an excellent question.
What would be an equally excellent answer?
That somebody violated their oath to protect classified information and violated that oath and shared that information in an unauthorized fashion with members of the media.
Well, my friend from Washington, and he is my friend, I was impressed not only with his eloquence, but the conviction with which he just spoke. But I've got other colleagues, not from Washington, that tend to minimize the nature of leaks as if there is somehow a weighing and a balancing that needs to take place between how interesting we may find the underlying information, how interesting we may find the underlying names. I have seen attempts, unfortunately, by members of this very body to mitigate and explain away and minimize what it does to the surveillance programs to have leaks of classified information. So I will finish with this. I believe there's some surveillance programs that are.
So it wasn't just leaks regarding Trump, Russia. There's leaks about all different types of things, including what Congressman Gowdy was talking about. This, ladies and gentlemen, is really interesting. We know that Brennan and others knew about the Steele dossier, used it to deceive the media. BuzzFeed published it, and even Michael Cohen was suing BuzzFeed from what I understand. Reports back in the day, before he turned on Trump. That's why Michael Cohen said that Comey's going to be found guilty just recently on MSNBC. But the thing is, check this out. Brennan cannot tell the truth about exactly what took place because at that point in 2016, 2017, there were so many leaks. There was so much emphasis on the Steele dossier, so much so that, like I said, BuzzFeed published it, that all of, like, for example, the George Papadopoulos was set up, but there was a meeting that he had that they said, oh, well, it was that meeting. They just needed a pretext. So they had a Papadopoulos meeting and a dossier, and that was the reason to use the entire United States government to create a new Cold War, Red Scare, McCarthy era zeitgeist. This is the basis for the indictments right here. Check this out. Hit subscribe if you're new. It's right here in this line of questioning.
And I realize we're in an open session, so I'm going to word it a certain way, but I think you'll understand what I'm saying. In the preparation of the report on the 2016 election, which concluded that Russia favored the election of Donald Trump, who would have made the decision to include or exclude any evidence or indications of Russian intentions that were contrary to that conclusion?
Myself, Jim Comey, Mike Rogers, and Jim Clapper relied on the experts who pulled this draft together in the intelligence community assessment, and it was.
So that's perjury or misleading statement. They did not rely on experts. They created a fiction, a hoax. The experts literally told them that there was no reason to investigate Trump. We know that because Brennan is cited 12 different times in this declassified report, misleading Congress. Right here, CIA, Brennan, and the IC mischaracterized intelligence, misled lawmakers. Word manipulate is here. He overruled senior CIA officers who challenged the ICA's claims. We don't have direct information that Putin wanted to get Trump elected. They never did. So he did not rely on the experts. Okay, that's another hilarious. An appeal to authority is not logical or rational when that's the only thing that when that's the basis for any claim. If that's the only basis for a claim, an appeal to authority is meaningless or not sufficient. Brennan then lied in using the dossier because he knew it was discredited and denied using the dossier. Brennan refused to remove it and when confronted, responded, yes, but doesn't it ring true? Doesn't it ring true? What does that even mean? So check this out. This is you have to understand, they never thought that Trump could win again after 4 years of Biden. They never even thought that Trump could defeat Clinton. They never in a million years believed Comey would ever be indicted. Just like not in a million years do they believe that Clinton or Brennan or others would be indicted, but they all will be indicted. Multiply my interest in this for the past 10 years times 20,000 and then or a billion, and you wouldn't even get half of the passion and energy that President Trump has on this. But anyway, let's continue.
Was a process where the representatives from those entities wrestled with the language to make sure that they had as much accuracy and precision and consensus as possible. So any adjustments that were made during the process. I met with some of my officers who were involved in it. I asked them questions. I wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with sort of the language that was being used, but it would have been that internal interagency process that then resulted in the intelligence community assessment. That is the traditional way that these assessments are drafted, are coordinated, and are published.
And again, without even getting to the final conclusion, if there were other evidence, though, that indicated contrary, should that have been listed or not?
You're dealing with a lot of information when you put together an intelligence assessment, and it comes down to a distillation process. And as you know, there were two products that were produced, a unclassified version and a highly classified version. And the attempt was to try to include in that highly classified version all of the relevant and pertinent information that needed to be in there in order to undergird the judgments contained. And so
yeah, but it was completely classified, and the version that wasn't classified and the classified version, they're not that different because it's all made up. They made up everything pertaining to Trump.
was 100% of all of the information available put into that highly classified one? No, but it was taken into account. And so therefore, again, some decisions have to be made about it. But I am unaware that anything was intentionally excluded because of intelligence, that is, that was for some reason one of the agencies didn't want in there for a reason that was not a very legitimate intelligence reason.
I think we can discuss that in the executive session. Mr. Gowdy, I'll balance my time to you.
Thank you, my friend from New York. Director Brennan, last time we were talking about at the inception of your investigation in 2016. I want the next question to include the inception, the pendency, up until your very last day.
So who is sitting behind Trey Gowdy? That is one reason why indictments of Brennan and others have already been written or imminent. Who is sitting behind Trey Gowdy, ladies and gentlemen, and what is his current occupation? Who is sitting behind Trey Gowdy? Who was sitting behind Trey Gowdy around 10 years ago, or about 8 years ago, and what is his current occupation?
At the CIA. Did you see evidence of collusion, coordination, conspiracy between Donald Trump and Russian state actors?
I saw information and intelligence that was worthy of investigation by the Bureau to determine whether or not such cooperation or conclusion was taking place.
There was no coordination, there was no collusion, there was no contact, there was no illegal activity. But he said that he saw something that gave him that made his spidey sense tingle.
That doesn't help us a lot. What was the nature of the information?
As I said, Mr. Gowdy, I think this committee now has access to the type of information that I'm alluding to here. It's classified, and I'm happy to talk about it in classified.
If you only knew what I knew, then you would know how wrong you were to even doubt what I know that you don't know.
Session.
And that would have been directly between the candidate and Russian state actors?
That's not what I said. I'm not going to talk about any individuals.
But that was my question. And you answered it. You didn't answer it that way.
No, I responded to your query. I'm not going to respond to particular elements of your question because I think it would be inappropriate for me to do so here.
Perjury. That is perjury. Misleading Congress. Okay, he did not give a straight answer, not because there was a legitimate classified data breach that could have taken place. He did not answer the question because answering the question would have completely obliterated and destroyed the investigation into Trump, which was fabricated to begin with. Again, I am not stating that he deserves prosecution because I like Trump. If John Ratcliffe set up and framed Kamala Harris or Biden with a dossier that said that Biden was in a hotel room, well, I mean, we don't have to go there with the Hunter laptop, but I would not be championing indictments for, I wouldn't simply blindly defend President Trump or Rudy Giuliani or the Republican National Committee if they purchased a dossier to set up and frame Harris or Biden or Clinton or President Obama. The reverse is true with Democrats. So when I'm pointing out Brennan's lies, I'm not doing so, because I love President Trump and I think he's a great president and amazing. I'm doing so because he did set up and frame Trump. If Ratcliffe did that, I would show the same testimony. But John Ratcliffe wouldn't be. John Ratcliffe, Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, they don't need to set up and frame anyone. That's not the way they do business. That's not the way they do business. That's the way that Brennan, Comey, Clinton, and others did business.
I can only repeat what I said, which is that I was aware of intelligence and information about contacts between Russian officials and U.S. persons that raised concerns in my mind about whether or not those individuals were cooperating with the Russians either in a witting or unwitting fashion, and that served as the basis for the FBI investigation to determine whether such collusion, cooperation occurred.
All right. Well, there are a bunch of words that start with C floating around. I asked you about collusion, coordination, and conspiracy, and you used the word contact. And I think in a previous answer, you did a really good job of establishing that contact could be benign or not benign. So was it contact that you saw? Was it something more than contact? What is the nature of what you saw?
I saw interaction and aware of interaction that, again, raised questions in my mind about what was the true nature of it. But I don't know. I don't have sufficient information to make a determination whether or not such cooperation or complicity or collusion was taking place.
And yet he did know. He did know. We have Brennan knowing very well that there was not a shred of evidence. There was never any evidence. There was never any evidence that Putin wanted Trump. There was never any evidence that Trump had any compromising business deals or any espionage. There was no video. There was no audio. There was no money trail. There were no private servers. There was no laptop associated with Trump. There wasn't even a campaign finance violation. Mueller didn't even find a campaign finance violation. Okay? There wasn't even a campaign finance violation, which is wouldn't even be a felony or like an overt criminal act. But the DNC and the Clinton campaign paid a campaign finance fine, an FEC fine for the Steele dossier. The Mueller probe couldn't even find a campaign finance violation. And Brennan knew that there was no link between Trump and Putin or Russia. None. So that is yet another example of perjury. I mean, with all due respect to the former director, every single thing he said was almost certainly perjury. But let's continue.
I know that there was a basis to have individuals pull those threads.
Oh, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you saw something that led you to refer it to law enforcement. And in your judgment, it is up to law enforcement to test, probe, corroborate, contradict, otherwise investigate the full nature of that information you passed on. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yes, it is, because it's not CIA's job to make a determination about whether a U.S. person is cooperating, colluding, or whatever in some type of criminal or illegal matter. It is our responsibility to give the Bureau everything that they need in order to follow that path and make such a determination and recommendation if they want to press charges.
All right, we'll pick it up next time.
Ms. Sewell, 5 minutes.
Welcome, Director Brennan. Building
Democratic institutions. We need to continue to do that. We need to continue to do even more of it.
That you've looked at
That information at all times hurts the national.
leaks to with our intent of a last.
So, really quickly, this is just one of the declassified press releases talking about declassified information, new evidence uncovered. Okay, false intelligence report used to launch years-long coup. Brennan is mentioned numerous times. CIA Director Brennan and IC mischaracterized intelligence and relied on dubious substandard sources. Director Brennan and the IC misled lawmakers by referencing the debunked Steele dossier to assess Russia's plans and intentions, which falsely suggested the dossier had intelligence value. The IC excluded significant intelligence and ignored or selectively quoted reliable intelligence that contradicted the ICA's findings that Putin's alleged support for Trump, that if included would have exposed the ICA's claim, was implausible, if not ridiculous. It was completely ridiculous and implausible. The notion that the notion that Putin or Russia would fear Democrats is completely absurd in every way. They don't even fear NATO. So, and they invaded under Biden, and they took Crimea under President Obama, and they invaded Georgia under Bush. So they don't care about the traditional Washington foreign policy. They don't care. Trump came in specifically because the American people wanted a less militant, less interventionist, less hawkish foreign policy. They criminalized the 2016 decision by the American people to elect a less militant man in President Trump, which is it was always the morally superior decision to elect President Trump. Okay, he was less militant. He would refuse to send Americans to never-ending counterinsurgency conflicts. And like President Obama, who wanted a Russian reset, and you could look at Clinton with the foreign minister and that big reset button, President Obama literally campaigned on a less hawkish Russia policy than McCain. But Trump wanted a less militant policy also. Fast forward 8 years, and suddenly that's grounds for being disloyal. But again, it takes 3 weeks for the morally superior to start keying Teslas. So the value system is malleable, like silly putty. But anyway, let's continue. Hit subscribe if you're new.
Or 2 open sessions ago from the House Intelligence Committee. It's one that sort of got a lot of hoopla on TV with regard to our side of the aisle here trying to make a diversionary tactic when we talk about the importance of what leaks do with our intelligence community. And I just want to ask you if you agree with Admiral Rogers that when high-level intelligence community officials, I think some news reports had almost 20 people leaking classified information to the press, if you agree with Admiral Rogers that kind of leaking with our ability to have to reauthorize things like 702 so we can gather intelligence on bad guys for political purposes, if you agree that kind of activity actually hurts our national security.
I think the unauthorized disclosure of classified information at all times hurts our national security, compromises our intelligence capabilities, and needs to be investigated, needs to stop. Absolutely.
Thank you.
James Comey is on record as stating he wrote the Comey memo. This is to Dianne Feinstein. You've heard the congressional testimony on this channel as well. That Uma Abedin was forwarding classified data to Anthony Weiner's laptop. Okay, so, I mean, that's one of the reasons Comey wrote the Comey letter, which actually did sink Clinton's campaign. I love Trump, but I was the biggest Bernie Sanders booster on the internet, according to the Huffington Post, and an unofficial scribe of Sanders' most hardcore voters, according to the Washington Post. Embarrassing for both me and anyone who still supports Bernie Sanders, who was almost certainly in on the whole charade. In 2016, they cheated Bernie Sanders, and he almost certainly knew that. He would be cheated. But he took that money, honey, and the donations, not personally, but to the DNC, and then they used that money to purchase a Steele dossier. But all those leaks were very important. That's how these people, Comey, McCabe, Brennan, all these people leaked information to create, to essentially fabricate and create U.S. history. They wanted to, it was like Dungeons and Dragons for wonderful, morally superior liberal Democrats and never Trump Republicans. They created a fantasy world, and the New York Times, the Washington Post, MSNBC, CNN, all these people were more than willing to create this fantasy world that doesn't exist. That Trump was working in cahoots with the Ruskies. And that's how Clinton lost.
With regard to more specific questions, with regard to hacking, when did you learn of the Russian hacking in the last election cycle?
Roughly in the summer.
And did you at that time notify both campaigns that you, or did somebody at the agency, or are you aware that both campaigns were notified at that time that there was an effort by the Russians to hack and try to influence the political campaign of last year?
I was aware that both campaigns were being contacted and notified about it, yes.
You said, I believe, to Mr. Gowdy that you...
By the way, not one vote was altered by Facebook or Twitter bots or whatever it is that they claimed that the Putins were doing. Not one vote. The DNC emails showed that they cheated Bernie Sanders, and then the campaign emails and the foundation emails showed massive corruption. Of course, that's lost within the narrative that another adversary, a Cold War adversary, wanted to push you away by exposing the corruption of the Democratic Party. Oh! And it's like, well, but were the Democrats actually corrupt? Did they cheat Bernie Sanders? Did they use a foundation as a conduit for bribes? Did they, I don't know, all these, but the DNC emails showed him a whole bunch of things that were corrupt. Does the corruption still exist? That doesn't matter. The Russians wanted you to know how corrupt the Democrats were. That means Trump is bad.
You believe that there was information of contact between people in the Trump universe and Moscow. Whether or not that was collusion or not remains to be seen. You said you didn't know if it was actual collusion. I think that your words were, I don't know. Can you tell us whether or not, from the information that you've looked at, it looks like the intelligence shows that Moscow was actually rooting for Donald Trump, or were they rooting against Hillary Clinton? And why?
I think my assessment is it was both. I think that they, at different times in the campaign, they felt that the fortunes of one candidate or the other was going up or down. And I think that they, most of the time, believed that Secretary Clinton was going to win the election. And so their efforts to denigrate her were not just to try to diminish her chances of winning, but also to hurt her and for her eventual presidency. But also, it's my assessment that they clearly had a more favorable view toward Mr. Trump, and actions they were taking were trying to increase his prospects, even though I think that they probably felt as though they were not all that great.
Why? Why did they want her, or why did they want him and not her?
I think that's a variety of reasons. One is that there was had been a traditional, I think, animus, certainly between Mr. Putin and Secretary Clinton.
This is all nonsense. There was no animus. And this is, he can't answer why Russia would want Trump over Clinton. If anything, any adversary would want a president with secret servers. So Madam Secretary had secret private servers with classified top secret intelligence on them. What adversary wouldn't want that type of, not only mishandling, obscene mishandling of classified data on digital, on computers? Why wouldn't you want that type of person?
As well as there has not been a good relationship between between Putin and the Clintons over the years. I felt that.
And this is according to the Hill. During the uranium deal, Bill Clinton literally met with Vladimir Putin at his home outside Moscow. That's according to the Hill. So that's nonsense. And you know what? I got to give it up. Bill Clinton's presidency, the 8 years, by today's he was a good president by today's standards, in my view. In my view, he was less hawkish than the modern day Democrats. The economy was good. He was very fortunate to have become president after the Cold War, after the Berlin Wall fell, Bill Clinton. But his presidency, he actually met Vladimir Putin and had a very good relationship with Putin. But anyway, let's continue.
That Secretary Clinton, with some of her actions while she was Secretary of State, led to some of the domestic disturbances inside of Russia. And I think he was more concerned that she was going to be more rigid on certain issues, particularly on human rights and other issues.
But what was Donald Trump going to do for them then? Or was it just that they didn't like Hillary?
No, I think they felt that Mr. Trump, being a bit of an outsider, and that they have in the past had some good relations with businessmen who happened to elevate into positions of government authority, and so felt as though from a negotiating standpoint.
So he's just making things up here. He's just making things up. Okay, Trump was not a businessman. Like he's a billionaire president. He doesn't need money. Okay, it's completely delusional to think that he needed money or that he would be blackmailed or anything like that. But anyway.
Standpoint that he might be more amenable to
good relations. What if that's true? One of the questions that I have, and this might be more appropriate for closed session, but if that's true, was there in your review of the evidence, was there more damaging evidence of Secretary Clinton that was not revealed? And if it wasn't revealed, what does that say about the Russian ability to be actually rooting for her to win?
Well, yeah, we can talk about it in close, but as I said, I think that they anticipated that Secretary Clinton was going to win the election. And so I believe that they tried to damage and bloody her before the election, but also I would have. So
you just heard here that he acknowledged that the Russians believed Hillary Clinton would win. So there goes the entire Trump-Russia narrative. The Russians believed that Clinton would win, yet Trump stole 2016 with collusion. How do you go from one to the other?
Anticipated that had she been elected, that their efforts to denigrate her and hurt her would have continued during her presidency. So if they did collect more information about her that they did not release, I think they were probably husbanding it for another day.
Chairman yields back. Ms. Spear, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Brennan, for your service. I'd like to spend some time talking about
who the Russians were that were meeting.
I'm sorry?
It's part of your concern, not just the fact that they're
thank you, as others have, for the specificity that you provide to us. These are difficult issues and concepts, different standards, intelligence assessments, evidence. We've got the FBI, the CIA. Each of you do different jobs, and your expertise is certainly helpful to us to unwind, as we're dealing with elements of this, what we're looking at and what this means as we try to move forward with an investigation. So you indicated that you saw, when asked about whether or not you'd seen evidence of collusion or collaboration, you said that you saw intelligence that indicated that there had been contacts with individuals, with Russians, that were of a nature that bore investigation. You said that those contacts might have been benign, might not have been, but they rose to the level of indicating that they need to be reviewed for their nature and looking into an investigation. Did I characterize that correctly?
Yes, but I don't want to take this out of context. We see contacts and interactions between Russian officials and U.S. persons all the time. It is when it's in the context that there's something else going on. And so we knew at the time that the Russians were involved in this effort to try to interfere in our election. So with that backdrop and increasing indications that they were involved in that, seeing these types of contacts and interactions during the same period of time raised my concern.
Excellent. I appreciate that.
So that was fabricated. That's perjury. We know that from the declassified documents and the fact that he couldn't answer the question. There was nothing that Trump did that was illegal. But again, we feel that possibly this needs to be looked at. So the entire 10 years of American history was wasted by people who said, gosh, we should really look into things that we don't need to look into simply to harm President Trump.
That qualification. But if someone left this hearing today and said that you had indicated that those contacts were evidence of collusion or collaboration, they would be misrepresenting your statements, correct?
They would have misheard my response to the very good questions that were asked of me. I'm trying to be as clear as possible in terms of what I know, what I assess, and what I can say.
So you would say that's a misrepresentation of your statement, yes?
I would say that it was not an accurate portrayal of my statement. Absolutely, Excellent. It was inconsistent with my remarks.
So let me go to the next step. If someone saw what you saw, and only what you saw, with respect to those contacts, if they looked at the intelligence that you saw, where you said it might have been benign, might not have been benign, and then they characterize what they saw as having been evidence of collusion or collaboration, they'd be misrepresenting the intelligence, would they not?
I don't know what else they have seen that could corroborate or is correlated.
Only what you saw. They would be misrepresenting the intelligence, correct?
I presume they would be misrepresenting what it is that I saw. Again, I don't
Excellent.
know.
Thank you. I appreciate that because I do believe that there are members
The Russian government.
Quite adept at. And what we've seen recently is the privacy rights and civil liberties of U.S. persons. But the Bureau has the primary responsibility in U.S. soil to follow its counterintelligence
evidence. We've got...
So you're going to hear that again. Basically, the Congressman Turner here is stating, well, if people saw what you saw and they said that Trump colluded, that would be wrong. Meaning what you saw did not, what Brennan saw did not point to Trump colluding with anyone. Correct? Well, he couldn't answer that question. Listen to that again. It's really hilarious. Because he can't say that Trump colluded with anybody because he knew that Trump did not. They had to create the impression. They had to create the impression that if only you knew what they knew, then you too would want to investigate Trump even though there was no evidence of him doing anything wrong. That's how absurd and outlandish the past 10 years have been.
the FBI, the CIA, each of you do different jobs, and your expertise is certainly helpful to us to unwind as we're dealing with elements of this, what we're looking at and what this means as we try to move forward with an investigation. So you indicated that you saw, when asked about whether or not you'd seen evidence of collusion or collaboration, you said that you saw intelligence that indicated that there had been contacts with individuals with Russians that were of a nature that bore investigation. You said that those contacts might have been benign, might not have been, but they rose to the level of indicating that they need to be reviewed for their nature and looking into an investigation. Did I characterize that correctly?
Yes, but I don't want to take this out of context. We see contacts and interactions between Russian officials and U.S. persons all the time. It is.
So now he's trying to say, oh, Uranium One, all the contacts Democrats have, let's just explain that when Democrats do it, or never Trump Republicans, it's okay. When they have business relationships or contacts with Russians, it's totally fine. But what happened with Trump was really suspicious. And we think that somehow, some way, he did something wrong, but we don't have any evidence that he did anything wrong. So now we're passing it to Comey and the FBI, and maybe they'll find out the evidence. But our spidey sense says that something has to be there. And they fabricated everything. They created a Cold War, a new Cold War. And for what purpose? President Trump just ended up winning after we endured 4 years of Biden. Yet again. He won again.
When it's in the context that there's something else going on. And so we knew at the time that the Russians were involved in this effort to try to interfere in our election. So with that backdrop and increasing indications that they were involved in that, seeing these types of contacts and interactions during the same period of time raised my concern.
Excellent. I appreciate that qualification. But if someone left this hearing today and said that you had indicated that those contacts were evidence of collusion or collaboration, they would be misrepresenting your statements, correct?
They would have misheard my response to the very good questions that were asked of me. I'm trying to be as clear as possible in terms of what I know, what I assess, and what I can say.
So you would say that's a misrepresentation of your statement, yes?
I would say that it was not an accurate portrayal of my statement. Absolutely.
Excellent.
It was inconsistent with my
So
remarks.
let me go to the next step. If someone saw what you saw, and only what you saw with respect to those contacts, if they looked at the intelligence that you saw, where you said it might have been benign, might not have been benign, and then they characterize what they saw as having been evidence of collusion or collaboration, they'd be misrepresenting the intelligence, would they not?
So this is an amazing way that Congressman Turner got Brennan to commit perjury almost certainly. If somebody saw what Brennan saw and said that Trump colluded, they would be wrong, correct? Because if you saw what Brennan saw, which we all now have seen with the declassified information that Tulsi Gabbard declassified, if you were to see what Brennan had seen, then you too would realize that Brennan was almost certainly committing perjury when he tried to mislead Congress into thinking that if only people had seen what he saw, therefore they would know that there's something there. But we don't know if there was collusion or anything illegal. But there was something there that needed to be investigated forever. Meaning that Trump was innocent, and this is how they set him up and framed him using the United States government as a way to tarnish Trump's image, credibility, and so you still have millions of Americans who truly believe that Trump worked with Russia. It is the greatest lie and hoax in American political history, far more than questioning how a person who couldn't communicate actually became the most popular candidate of all time, only less than 4 years later to be removed and ousted from office by his own political party. Anyway, let's continue.
I don't know what else they have seen that could corroborate or is correlated.
Only what you saw. They would be misrepresenting the intelligence, correct?
I presume they would be misrepresenting what it is that I saw. Again, I don't
Excellent.
know.
Thank you. I appreciate that because I do believe that there are members of this committee that deserve that counsel because your specificity gives us an understanding of what we're reviewing. And I do believe that there are those.
Rogers and Coates and urge them to rebut the issue of collusion. And that.
So this is absolutely fascinating. Two people who lied the most about Russia collusion, two people who were involved in setting up and framing Trump. Let's see if Schiff actually, sends him into a perjury trap inadvertently. This was hilarious.
That his staff asked personnel at those agencies to lobby Director Comey to drop the Flynn case. And significantly, it was admitted by the president himself that the Russia probe was the primary motivation behind his firing of Mr. Comey. If accurate, these events would have taken place shortly after you left the CIA. But as I imagine, you must have maintained many relationships with the incredible workforce at the CIA and elsewhere where you served for many decades. We will be interested to learn whether members of the intelligence community have shared information with you that corroborates any of these allegations, and how you assess the conduct of the administration may be impacting the ability of our agencies to gather critical information from our partners and the ability of the FBI to carry out its investigation free from interference. And last, I want to say a word about the appointment of Mr. Mueller as special counsel. Many of us have known Director Mueller for many years and have the utmost respect for him. But I take sharp issue with those who have suggested that his appointment, as important as it was to ensure public confidence in the conduct of the DOJ investigation, somehow obviates the need for our own congressional probe. Our investigation and Mr. Mueller's have two very different but equally important objects. His will ultimately determine whether any U.S. laws were broken and who should.
Rather than repeating
You're recognized.
Thank you. Representative Conaway, Representative Schiff, and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. As you know, I served as Director of the Central Intelligence Agency from March 2013 to January of this year, as Assistant to President Obama for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism from 2009 to 2013, and as a CIA officer, responsible, reckless, intolerable, and needed to stop. Over the years, it has been Mr. Bortnikov's FSB that has been most responsible for the charge, but said that he would inform President Putin of my comments. I believe I was the first U.S. official to brace the Russians on this matter. Third, through the so-called Gang of Eight process, we kept Congress apprised of these issues as we identified them. Again, in consultation with the White House, I personally briefed the full details of our understanding of Russian attempts to interfere in the election to congressional leadership, specifically Senators Harry Reid, Mitch McConnell, Dianne Feinstein, and Richard Burr, and to Representatives Paul Ryan, Nancy Pelosi, Devin Nunes, and Adam Schiff between 11 August and 6 September. I provided the same briefing to each of the Gang of Eight members.
Almost everyone on that list of politicians despises Trump. But anyway, let's continue.
Given the highly sensitive nature of what was an active counterintelligence case involving an ongoing Russian effort to interfere in our presidential election, the full details of what we knew at the time were shared only with those members of Congress, each of whom was accompanied by one senior staff member. The substance of those briefings was entirely consistent with the main judgments contained in the January classified and unclassified assessments, namely that Russia's goals were to undermine public faith in the U.S. democratic process, denigrate Secretary Clinton and harm her electability and potential presidency, and to help President Trump's election chances.
It was not to help Trump. It was not to help Trump. We know that. That claim would be implausible, if not ridiculous, according to the experts in the intelligence community. So it was not the notion that the Russians would be so afraid of Clinton is absurd.
Let me conclude by saying that it was a very special privilege to serve as a CIA officer for the first 25 years of my public service. And it was the highest honor of my professional career, and always will be, to have served another 4 years as director of CIA. CIA officers of all disciplines, past, present, and future, serve this country in a best counterterrorism community.
To do our jobs and to make a report, a recommendation to you and the new administration as to how we better defend ourselves against what Russia and or others may be trying to do with regard to affecting our republic and our democracy. And in doing so, if we do find any kind of criminal behavior, I think that the minority would agree that that type of information would be referred to the Justice Department, which is the proper jurisdiction. But with regard to the main question at hand, and your experience with the Russian trying to involve themselves in our election, did you ever find any evidence, as the ranking member spoke of collusion while you were the director, did you find direct evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Putin and Moscow while you were there?
Mr. Rooney, I never was an FBI agent. I never was a prosecutor, so I really don't do evidence. I do intelligence throughout the course of my career. As an intelligence professional,
you can replay that a million times. I don't do evidence, I do intelligence. One would assume that intelligence directly correlates to evidence. Otherwise, it wouldn't be intelligent to utilize intelligence that wasn't evidence, would it? How smart would it be to utilize intelligence that was devoid of evidence? This is not rocket science. You don't have to be this intellect. You don't have to be Einstein, to understand this is double speak. This is what George Orwell talked about, double speak. He doesn't do evidence, he does intelligence, which is malleable, which is flimsy, can be manipulated, fabricated, contrived, created. He doesn't do evidence, he does intelligence. That should have stopped and ended any investigation into Trump right then and there. Again, I am not focusing on the indictments that have basically already been written. Okay, people say, well, he hasn't been indicted yet. Yeah, he pretty much has. He pretty much has. John Radcliffe stated that John Radcliffe sent the criminal referral, and he's pretty much indicted. It's essentially indicted. But the point is, the Comey indictment is going to lead to the Brennan and eventually Hillary Clinton indictment. But he did not have evidence. He never had evidence. That's why he's mentioned so often. Laughing Dog, it's happening, Brother H.A. Thank you. Yes, Laughing Dog, I appreciate your support. Laughing Dog, thank you. And thank you for watching for so long. It is happening. He doesn't do, thank you, Laughing Dog, greatly appreciated, greatly appreciated. My super chat, thank you. The ICA omitted reliable source information, such as how some Russian intelligence were planning for candidates' victory, while others assessed neither Trump or Clinton would respect Russia's interests. There was never a shred of evidence that said that Trump was working with the Kremlin or that the Kremlin wanted Trump. It's completely absurd. It was the most outlandish, hilarious, pathetic, absurd propaganda spin. But people were completely mortified that Trump won. And they needed to latch on to a scapegoat. And what better scapegoat for Brennan and Comey and others than the well we have in our national psyche of a 50-year Cold War. That included, by the way, nukes, unfortunately, which I don't think that they put that as part of the equation, which they should have anyway, because that was what made everything so frightening. But anyway, hit subscribe. God bless you all. Nobody's perfect. If I said anything or did anything to, hurt anyone's feelings in my entire life, if you're watching, I apologize. I apologize. But I didn't create a new Cold War to tarnish and imprison my political rivals. So that atonement will take place. It's taking place right now with Comey and indictments of Brennan and Clinton upcoming. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. Be here tonight for the live stream. I will have an upload on H.A. Goodman's other channel in a second. Go there right now and hit subscribe. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you.